Hi, I'm Savannah.
And I'm Gabby.
We did our project on G protein receptor pathways and how it comes into play with Alzheimer's disease. G proteins are special proteins that combine the nucleotides guanosine triphosphate, also known as GTP, and guanosine diphosphate, also known as GDP. And these are building blocks needed for the combining of messenger RNA, which is an essential protein used in cells. G proteins are important because they transmit signals from many things within the cells of the body. For example, signals from hormones or neurotransmitters. Throughout this video, you will be able to see why this is so important and how, without G protein receptor pathways, there are lethal effects. We are going to explain this through the Wnt signaling pathway, which is a specific G protein pathway, and how without it, Alzheimer's disease will take its course in the brain. Okay, the canonical Wnt signaling pathway causes the binding to a receptor called frizzled and causes the downstream signaling pathways. When Wnt, a ligand, binds to frizzled, and then the CK1 or casein kinase, a protein within the pathway, there's an activation of the scaffold protein called disheveled, which is a crucial regulator in the signaling pathways. This prompts the breaking down of the destruction complex, which is a multi-protein that involves tumor suppressors, leading to the building up and stability of the B-cantonine, which is a dual-function protein, in the cytosol and its movement into the nucleus of cells and promotes the target gene expression. As well, the binding of Wnt stimulates disheveled with its core receptor and activates things like GTP PACE, which is an enzyme, leading to the change of a protein's reorganization. Following, in the calcium ion pathway, which is the second messenger pathway, the calcium ion levels increase by Wnt receptors and the activation of other proteins. This followed by the movement of T cells, which are immune response cells found in the thymus, and other cells which activate genes into a specific necessary sequence, all in all creating a platform that inhibits components of the destruction complex. Wnt signaling carries a large role of bringing together of neurons and its function maintenance. Without Wnt, there is binding failures in diseases like Alzheimer's, allowing the destruction complex to destroy many aspects of cells, causing growth within the spinal sensors, nerve growth, other deficits within binding of neurons, and other wrongs within the hippocampal neurons, which is in the brain. These effects of the inactive Wnt pathway don't allow cells to do their jobs and makes them shrivel up and accumulate plaque within the brain. As you can see, there's not as many beta-catenin as there are in the active in the inactive, which allows the destructive complex to break down parts of the cell and cause for dysfunction within the cell.
So as Savannah mentioned before, she mentioned something called a plaque, which is just a cluster of proteins that build up in between the nerve cells. So plaques, which right here, this cluster, is made up of smaller pieces of another protein called the beta-amyloid. The beta-amyloid protein, which are these little fragments right here, they're found in a larger protein along the fatty membrane of a nervous cell. So in a healthy brain, the beta-amyloid is broken down and destroyed, but in a brain of someone that has Alzheimer's, the beta-amyloid fragments are accumulated and turned into plaques. So you can see right here, these little red fragments are traveling up to bind with the rest, and they're gonna form plaques right under a damaged nerve cell. So a healthy nerve cell looks like this, it's a little bit more plump, and this one is like really shriveled up and dead. So what happens to the brain during Alzheimer's? The cortex, which is this blue highlighted portion all around the brain, shrivels, which damages areas involved in thinking, planning, and remembering. Another area that shrivels is the hippocampus. The hippocampus is an area in the cortex that plays a key role in the formation of new memories. And weirdly enough, the ventricles, which are these pink areas right here, they contain cerebral spinal fluid. They're actually enlarged and not shrunken.
Okay, so to further elaborate on the Wnt signaling process within the brain, you can see that this is a normal brain. And this is a normal brain when the Wnt signaling pathway is active. you can see that this is the Wnt ligand, this is the frizzled, this is the CK1, this is the disheveled, and these are the beta catenines and the target gene cell area, and the rest of the proteins and aspects of the pathway that I talked about earlier. As you can see, while the signaling pathway is on, you can see that gears that represent the Wnt ligand and the frizzled, along with other aspects of the pathway, are able to move. Here you can see that the Wnt signaling pathway is inactive. There's no longer a Wnt ligand connected to the frizzled, and you can see that there are less beta-catenin, and the overall aspect of the pathway can no longer function. Now the gears that represent the frizzled and the other aspects of the cell can now no longer move. When the Wnt signaling pathway is inactive, the destructive complex takes over. When the destructive complex takes over, it all in all leads to diseases like Alzheimer's, where the cells within the brain can no longer function as they're supposed to. One of the biggest defects when it comes down to the brain in Alzheimer's is that it shrivels up.
Why does the brain shrivel during Alzheimer's? As I mentioned before, the plaque protein building up between the nerve cell damages and kills the cell. Once a nerve cell is killed, you can't develop more nerve cells from that nerve cell. So, if you look inside of this brain, think of the black pipe cleaner as a nerve cell and the white pipe cleaner as plaque. These two black pipe cleaners can be looked at as a healthy nerve cell, while these pipe cleaners with the white plaque on it can be looked at as a damaged nerve cell. Once these two nerve cells have plaque on them and are damaged, you cannot develop more healthy nerve cells from them. But from these two healthy nerve cells, you can.
Go.
And as the disease develops and the more nerve cells that are killed, the brain will shrivel dramatically. So it'll go from a normal size, like this, to a small size, like this. So what happens to the individual person with Alzheimer's disease? As I mentioned before, the plaque buildup will cause them to lose their short-term memory. And then as the disease progresses, the person may isolate themselves from a social setting out of fear that they will be too confused to carry a conversation. And finally, when the disease is in its final stage, a person will forget how to do basic things like swallowing food, and they will end up starving to death.